Who is the best Revive champion in Raid Shadow Legends? I ask you that question because the Christmas fusion, Lady Noelle, has an excellent revive and she's definitely going to enter the conversation. But how does she compare against the current slate of Revive champions? Well, that's what I'm going to try to answer today with my top 10 list of the best revivers in all of Raid. I am Colred. This is Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. Let's get started. Just a quick note, I will have a Takeover Tuesday live stream this Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I give away free account takeovers to members of my Discord community. You should come check it out. It's a lot of fun. And as always, don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider joining our Discord community. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to that top 10 list. Let me start by saying that this has been the most difficult top 10 list I have ever tried to put together. Now, the idea for this video was very simple. I wanted to give a unique perspective on Lady Noelle and how good she might be for those of you who are still undecided about the Christmas fusion. However, when I started to do my research, I realized there are so many champions in Raid that have some form of revive that I was looking at 70, 80 champions. So I had to create some rules for myself, some parameters to pare the group down to something a bit more reasonable. So I want to explain what I came up with so you understand exactly what this tier list represents. Now, the first thing that I decided to do was focus on champions whose primary role was reviving. So I eliminated anybody who was basically a random reviver or a single target reviver or anything like that. They really needed to be AoE revivers to make this list. Now, that does mean that one or two really, really good revivers did get eliminated. I want to call out one who I think people are going to be surprised maybe isn't on this list, and that is Godseeker Aniri. Godseeker Aniri is arguably a top 10 reviver in this game. She could definitely make this list, but she has a single target revive, and so I have eliminated her from contention for this list. I just want you to be aware. In addition, I wanted these champions to have really solid, reliable value in both PvE and PvP. So not just one or the other. And that means that their revives have to be reliable. And as a result, I have also eliminated champions who have revives that primarily come from their passives. So for instance, in this case, Mariska. Now, you could argue Mariska might be a top 3 PvP reviver, but as a PvE reviver, she is decidedly lacking because her only revive comes from her passive, and as a result, it's just not reliable enough in PvE content to really make her a top 10 champion on this list. That also eliminated Siegfried and Lydia. Now, finally, out of the remaining champions, I thought I could put together a pretty good tier list, but I did eliminate one more champion, and I did this for a very specific reason. I think it's reasonable. I eliminated Galathir. Now, there's no argument that Galathir, I think, would be on this list. He'd be a top 10 reviver, but he's the only mythical champion left that would make the list after Siegfried was eliminated. Unless I'm missing another mythical reviver, you can let me know that in the comments. But if you have Galathir, first of all, you know how good he is, and you don't care if he's on this list or not. And second, most players just don't have Galathir. So I wanted to make a list that was a little bit more accessible. There are going to be some Void Legendaries. Yes, that's just part of it. But the reality is, as the only mythical, I thought he could just be excluded and nobody would feel too hurt by that. So those are the champions who have been excluded. And now we can get to the champions who have been included. I've narrowed it down to 10. And I will say this, from 10 through about 5 or 4, you could pretty much interchange these. And I don't think anybody's going to argue too much, but I had to make a judgment based on a couple of things. One is, do I own the champion and do I just have an impression of how good they are? And two, if I don't own the champion, have I come up against them in PvP? How valuable do they feel there? And then finally, can I theory craft value for champions that maybe I haven't used before? So that's it. That's everything. Those are the conditions for this tier list. So let's get started. We're going to start at the bottom with Kaya the Rye. Now, she is actually a really good reviver, but this is going to be sort of the standard that we're setting for revives here. You can see her revive is actually her A2. Revives all dead allies with 50% HP and 50% turn meter, then places increased crit rate and increased crit damage buff on them. If Timit the Fool is part of the team, then he gets revived with a full HP and full turn meter, which is really nice. And then if he's alive, when the revive goes off, it just activates one of his skills. Now, this is the only champion on this list who has a duo other than Lady Noelle. And so I wanted to consider Kaeya without her duo, just like I'm going to be considering Lady Noelle without her duo. So as a result, you can basically eliminate the bottom of this skill explanation. And we're just talking about a 50% HP and 50% turn meter revive with crit rate and crit damage. That's nice. That's a reason to be in the top 10. 50 and 50 is kind of the standard for excellent revives. And then she's getting a buff on top of this. Now, in this particular case, they're offensive buffs, which I think are less useful and less synergetic, I guess. Is that the word? They synergize less well with sort of the role of reviver. And as a result, she's sitting down here at 10. Still a very respectable revive, and if you have Kaeya, you should consider using her in this role. Okay, so Kaeya the Rai is our number 10 champion. Now, for number 9, we have a champion everybody can get, and that is Arbiter. Here she is. You can see her revive is actually not great on the face of it, but it revives all dead allies with 30% HP and fills the turn meter of all allies by 20%. So 30% HP, 20% turn meter, that's not great. But what happens is if this revive is successful, it gives you an extra turn. And if you set this up the right way, that then goes into her A3, which places an increased attack buff, gives everybody 30% turn meter, and everyone who got revived and everybody else who has HP under 50% will then get an additional heal of 25% of their max HP. So this turns into a 55% max HP and a 50% turn meter with an increased attack. So very similar to Kaeya's. You'll notice that this is on a 5-turn cooldown when booked. Kaeya's is on a 4-turn cooldown. But because of the extra turn mechanics, they're basically on the same cooldown. And as a result, I think, you're really close here. I think the tipping point, the tiebreaker for me was that Arbiter is available to everybody. So everybody's going to have this champion. She is great in PvE. She's great in PvP. The revive is usable everywhere. And that heal on her A3 is also part of the deal because you get that, so you can buff heals and stuff like that. So it could be a little bit more HP than even 55% beyond that. So I think those were the tiebreakers, and that's why Arbiter is in 9th place. Now coming into 8th place was a champion that I actually got recently, and that is Sulfurion. I had trouble placing Sulfurion. Honestly, I had him as high as 3 at one point, and then I knocked him down here to 8, and I'm going to show you why. His kit is unusual. On the face of it, his revive is actually not hugely powerful. 50% HP, 40% turn meter, so a little bit worse than Kaeya's. However, he does get the extra turn just like Arbiter does. Now, Arbiter's extra turn is fairly reliable. You can say, okay, I'm going right into that A3, whereas Sulfurion's is a little bit more complicated. He has this A2 that places an HP burn on all enemies and then activates it, right? And it also places a shield equal to the damage of the HP burn activation. So you get HP burns, you get a shield, and you get an HP burn activation. You get all of those happening simultaneously. Now, the reason this matters is because of Sulfurion's passive. So first of all, it places, it fills turn meter of all allies by 5% for each HP burn debuff placed. So potentially, let's say in a normal dungeon, he revives a champion, and then he gets the extra turn, and he places his HP burns out. If he's hitting a wave of 5 champions, you're going to get 25% extra turn meter fill. And then in addition, anytime an HP burn debuff is activated, it heals allies by 5%. So you're going to get 25% additional heal. That turns that 50 and 40 into a 75 and 70. I'm sorry, a 75 and 65 in terms of HP and turn meter fill. There are situations where it's going to be less. There's situations where it's going to be more. Worst case scenario is he uses his A1, and you can see this is fills the turn meter of all allies except this champion by 10% when attacking a target under HP burn debuff, which is likely to happen with Sulfurion. So you're going to get probably at least that much. You're going to get at least that 10% turn meter fill, but it's a little bit less reliable than Arbiter's, but the ceiling is higher, I think. And so as a result, I ended up putting him here at 8 because I actually think he's fairly similar to Arbiter, but just slightly better. All right, we are moving on to number 7. And this is actually a champion that I don't own. So those of you who do own him could give me a little bit of your impression. But this is going to be Bellator. So Bellator here is, or Bellator Mage Slayer. Now, I would say, you know, something to remember about this tier list is this is not the best champion necessarily. Like this is tier list isn't the top 10 best champions who have revives. This is literally judging their ability to revive. So for instance, I think Sulfurion is a better champion than Bellator, but Bellator has the better revive. In this particular case, if we look at this, revives all dead allies with 50 and 50. That's sort of our standard, right? And then places a shield buff on all revived allies equal to 20% of this champion's max HP. This is a nice defensive sort of standard revive. So why is that not as, or why is that better than Sulfurions and Arbiters and so on and so forth? I think because when you think about the role of Reviver, surviving after the revive is really important, right? Having a champion who gets revived, actually getting to their turn is the point. If they're just going to die right away, if they're not going to get to their turn, then that's a problem. So 50 and 50 is nice. That gets them halfway to their turn. But this shield also gives them some extra survivability. And the shield is based on his max HP. So you can make this a very large shield if you want. It's going to be much larger than 20% of their own max HP. So you could look at this as something like revives dead allies with 80 or 90% of their HP plus 50% of their turn meter, right? Because they're getting that huge shield on top of their HP. Now, I know that's temporary HP, but for the first turn after they're revived, that's extremely valuable. So I do think Bellator is going to get more champions to their turn after they're revived than the champions below him on this list. All right, moving on to number 6, we have Raka Viletide. So this is another Void legendary. Now, Raka, I've had on several accounts. She's an excellent all-around champion, but she's also a really good reviver. So if you look at her revive, it revives with 50 and 50, then places a block debuffs buff on all allies for 2 turns, and it will place the block debuffs even if there are no dead allies. So I looked at this versus Bellator. I'm like, which one of these is better? Honestly, I think you could reverse them if you wanted, but I stuck Raka here at 6 because of the added value of being able to use this revive as just a block buffs debuff. You don't have to use her as a revive. So it's not just sitting there waiting for somebody to die. It's a very good revive, but on top of that, it has some extra utility. So I think that that is why I put her just one step above Bellator. But again, like I said, a lot of these champions, I think, are all within a very small margin of each other. So if you wanted to reverse the order here, I would understand. But for right now, Raka sits at number 6. Moving on to number 5, we have one of my favorite revivers on my roster, which is Pythion, a former fusion. Pythion is in the Lizardman faction. Now, Pythion, also like Raka and Bellator, has a revive that just is focused on survivability for the champions. So it's a 50 and 50 with a strengthen for 2 turns. And by the way, all of these are on a 4-turn cooldown. Every single one of these revivers is on a 4-turn cooldown up to this point. So is the strengthen better than Bellator's shield? Is it better than the block debuffs from Raka? And ultimately, I decided that in this particular case, the strengthen is probably the best, most survivable tool because it's going to work against champions who ignore shields. Whereas some champions ignore strengthen as well. It doesn't, I don't know. It's a coin flip here. I think 7, 6, and 5 are all kind of interchangeable, but I like Pythion's overall kit a little bit better. I think his cleanse and his block debuffs being on the same skill is good. His A1 is good. He's a healer, as well and a very good one. So I do think all of this. Plus, you do get this extra passive. Allies receive 5% less damage from skills for each buff on them. So his strengthen is actually worth 30% damage mitigation, not just 25. And if you have other buffs coming in from your team, this passive continues to ramp up. So in terms of survivability, remember that's the primary thing. Get your champions revived and get them to their next turn. I think Pythion is maybe just a little bit ahead of Bellatar and Rock of Iletide in this aspect, but you can decide. Let me know what you think. Our number 4 champion here is none other than Duchess Lilitu. So she is a fantastic reviver, and I struggled trying to decide where she belonged on this list because her revive is very different from these 50 and 50 revivers that we've seen in other places. So her revive is all dead allies with 70% HP, but no turn meter. So they have more HP, then they get a veil on everybody except for this champion. And then it also places a continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns. So in terms of survivability, this may be the best or close to the best in terms of survivability. 70% HP, plus that continuous heal is coming, plus the veil, which makes them untargetable. And so there's a lot to recommend this revive, but there is no turn meter. And with no turn meter, it's really hard to put her any higher than 4. I considered dropping her lower, but if I were going to drop her lower, I'd have to probably drop her all the way down to 7 or 8, and it didn't feel like she belonged down there. I do think this is good for PvE and PvP. I think it's stronger in PvP, but I still think it's a very good PvE revive. But the lack of turn meter and the lack of any other way to get turn meter into, like, from her kit is definitely a problem. I will say her passive also adds to that survivability aspect, though, because decreases. Remember, with the veil, her champions can only be hit by AoEs, and then she reduces damage from AoEs as well. So super, super survivable, maybe the most survivable again on this list. And as a result, she lands here at number 4. Okay, moving on. Who could be better than Duchess? Well, I've got to say there is another past fusion champion who I actually love. I have on my roster as well, and that is Mighty Uko. So Mighty Uko has an excellent revive, revives all allies with 40% HP, so not 50% HP, then places a block damage buff on them for 1 turn. Okay. Also places an increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns and will place the increased speed even if there are no dead allies. So I had a struggle with Uko as well. I think, like Duchess, this is a revive that gives a lot of survivability. Block damage is better than a strengthen. It's better than a shield. Yes, it can be removed and then your champions are very close to death. They're only at 40% HP. But in PvE especially, this is incredibly valuable, and you can always target PvP teams according to their skills. So I think this is a highly flexible, very versatile revive skill. In addition, it synergizes well with the A1, which has an AoE decrease attack. It's not 100%, but a very good A1. Plus, that increased speed can be used even when there are no dead allies. So we've talked about this before, but kind of like Rock of Iletide's revive, you can use this revive as a utility skill. And so therefore, I think that increases the value of this champion, both as a reviver and then bringing in those other skills as well. And even though there is no turn meter on this revive, that increased speed acts kind of like a turn meter fill. So everybody's going to be moving 30% faster. And so that's kind of like a 30% turn meter fill when you come in with 0% turn meter. So you have that increased speed for champions who didn't die, but also for the ones who did die. So I think this is a very strong revive and a very strong kit. I really like Mighty Uko. And again, a past fusion, but Uko lands here at number 3. Okay, we are getting down to the nitty gritty. Only 2 spots left. And this may be a surprise to some of you. Some of you may really not like this pick, but I honestly feel like this is legitimately how I feel about this pick. We have our number 2 pick is our only epic on the list, and it is Ursula the Mourner. If you don't know Ursula, or if you automatically just eliminate epics from contention on these top tier lists, like, I think you're making a mistake. We said before that Godseeker Inari could make this list if I didn't have the conditions that I set, right? She's only a single target reviver, so she got eliminated. But Godseeker Inari could potentially crack this top 10 list as the best revivers in the game. And I think Ursula has what arguably might be the best revive in the game. This revives all dead allies with 75% HP and fills our turn meter by 50%. Also places an increased defense buff and a 25% strengthen buff on all allies for 3 turns. You get those buffs for 3 turns. So in terms of revive, if we just take the revive, 75% HP, 50% turn meter. So better than the 75, better than the 50 and 50 that we're kind of saying is the standard here. More HP than Duchess's revive, right? The standard turn meter fill, 50%, but on top of that gives the increased defense and the strengthen, and gives both of those buffs for 3 turns. So incredible survivability here. Is it better than Duchess's survivability? That's hard to say, right? A little bit more HP, definitely 50% more turn meter. Duchess brings no turn meter. And I think that was the difference between Ursula and Uko and Duchess. That 50% turn meter with the 75% HP, these champions are getting to their next turn. Increased defense, strengthen, absolutely, they're getting to their next turn. And that is ultimately how you judge revives. Bringing back a champion who dies instantly is not valuable. Now, I will say there was a serious knock on Ursula, and I really considered this one, and that is that her cooldown is 5 turns. Everybody else's is either 4 turns or 5 turns with an extra turn, right? And so I think turn count really does matter here. Cooldown count does matter. But for one time, if you just have to use this revive one time, I think Ursula's is the best in the game against all of these other legendaries. Now, that's going to be controversial. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Maybe that cooldown is just enough to knock her down the list for you, and that's totally fair. Some people say she's too squishy. I don't find that that's true. I actually think she's decently survivable for PvE content. In PvP, she's squishy. In PvP, she's probably not quite as good. Although, if you're just talking about Classic Arena, she's absolutely awesome in Classic Arena. So, again, Live Arena, maybe not. Maybe, you know, if you're Platinum Arena, maybe not. But I think Ursula is absolutely fantastic, and I just love having an epic here at number 2. And that leaves us with just one spot to go, and you know who is we're talking about for this video, and that means that the number 1 spot goes to Lady Noelle. Surprisingly, but let's talk about why. So here I am on hellhades.com because Lady Noelle is not currently in the game, but let's take a look at her revive skill. So it is called Hearthkeeper. You can see it right here. Revives all dead allies with 50% HP and 50% turn meter. That's that standard. Then has a 100% chance when booked of placing a freeze debuff on all enemies for 1 turn. Will place that freeze debuff even if there are no dead allies. This debuff cannot be resisted or blocked if Sir Nicholas is on the same team. But remember, we're considering her as if Sir Nicholas is not on the team. So she would need accuracy to land this freeze. Now, as far as the revive is concerned, 50 and 50 is very good, right? That is sort of the standard that we've seen for these top 10 revivers. But in addition, you're talking about a 100% chance to place a debuff. And remember, she is Void Affinity. Lady Noelle is Void Affinity. So there's no weak hits. She will place this freeze debuff if she has the accuracy and she doesn't get 3%ed. So in terms of getting her allies to their next turn, this is an extremely strong ability. She is going to get her champions, in most cases, to their next turn. They're halfway there already. They have a decent amount of HP, and now the enemies are probably going to be locked out. As far as PvE is concerned, this is absolutely god tier. This is crazy good just the way it is. As far as PvP is concerned, you're going to have to deal with Stone Skin. But if you have a way to deal with Stone Skin, either by going slow and surviving or, removing Stone Skin or whatever, I still think this is going to be extremely good in PvP, but it's definitely going to be god tier in PvE. But here's the thing that's even crazier than that, is it is on a 3-turn cooldown. It is now the only AoE revive in the game that's on a 3-turn cooldown. Remember, everybody else on the list, every single other champion on our list had a 4-turn cooldown or a 5-turn cooldown or a 5-turn cooldown with a extra turn. So nobody had a 3-turn cooldown. I think this alone, if you just had the 50% and 50% and the 3-turn cooldown, I think she might be the best reviver in the game. If you had just the 50 and 50 with the freeze, with the 100% freeze from the Void Legendary, that might make her the best reviver, even if it were on a 4-turn cooldown. But you combine all of these factors on a 3-turn cooldown, this is an incredibly powerful revive. Everybody needs a revive somewhere in their roster. Everybody needs a 100% AoE, hard CC like stun or freeze somewhere in their roster. She's bringing you both on the same skill on a 3-turn cooldown. That's incredibly strong. That's incredibly strong. In fact, it's so strong, I want to show you something else. Coming back to the index, we're going to jump into the Barbarian faction, and I'm going to show you Ykarl here. Now, Ykarl is a Void Legendary that everybody can collect, and he's very good, and he has that 100% AoE freeze that comes from a Void Legendary, and this skill is on a 4-turn cooldown. So what you're getting is a 50 and 50 revive on a 3-turn cooldown, which nobody else has, and you are getting an AoE 100% freeze from a Void Legendary on a 3-turn cooldown, which nobody else has. These are literally the two most powerful versions of these individual skills combined in Lady Noelle's revive. How good is this champion? She's going to be phenomenal, whether you have Sir Nicholas or not. Now, does she get better with him? She does. She gets even better with him. But even if you don't have Sir Nicholas, I think you're going to want to go after this fusion. Okay, so there it is, my top 10 list of best revivers in Raid Shadow Legends, and sort of a sideways review of Lady Noelle, the Christmas fusion. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know in the comments below. One, do you agree or disagree with my tier list? Do you think it's at least reasonable? I know some of those champions can be moved around, but do you believe that Lady Noelle deserves the top spot as the #1 reviver in all of Raid Shadow Legends? And second, are you going to go for Lady Noelle this Christmas? Because I know I am. That's it for me today. Thanks so much for hanging out. I have been Colred. I will see you in another video soon.